you can see, are trying to log in and get their audio sorted, and then we'll get started in a couple of minutes. So just please sit tight, and we'll start soon.
Thank you for joining us today for our Project Call 3.1 Proposal Stage webinar. Today's webinar will highlight the key requirements for your Project Call 3.1 proposals. Today, our presenters are Associate Institute Director Chris Roberts, Senior Program Manager Peggy Thomas, and Scientific Project Manager Melissa Scott. Other NIMBLE staff are also on the line. After the presentation, you'll be able to ask questions. To submit a question, type it in the WebEx chat box and address it to NIMBLE Institute. Please do not address it to everyone. Feel free to send your questions at any time. We will answer the questions at the conclusion of each section. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be available on the NIMBLE website by the end of this week. Please place yourself on mute. We will now begin the presentation with NIMBLE Associate Institute Director Chris Roberts.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on which time zone you're in, or good evening. Thanks everyone for taking the time to dial in and watch and listen to this presentation. And we're going to hold questions in stages. At the end, we've broken this presentation up into a few different parts, which will be presented by different folks on our team. But we'll take questions partway through in each one. And if you do have questions as we go and they come up later, just chat them in and we can still come back and circle back to those later. So this is focused on Project Call 3.1 for those who have been invited to a full proposal to deal with some commonly asked questions and to give you some highlights out of the RFP. There are three RFPs, one for the tech side, one for the workforce side, and one for the Global Health Fund. We'll state now and reiterate throughout that all of the details that are being shared are in those RFPs online, and so you should go through and read those in detail before submitting, but this will hopefully give you a first pass on all of that. So where are we in the current process? Just as an update, where we have on the top of this graphic is where we were in stage one, which all of you have gone through now, or at least those who are the PIs have gone through with the concept paper stage, through to the summit and the full proposal invitations, which went out just before the Thanksgiving holiday in the US. We're in the teaming stage now, where some of the teaming information has been sent out. We're still waiting a little bit on some additional pieces of information, so some PIs may receive additional suggested partners from some of our large industry members. Full proposals are due the 13th of February, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. A note, we will highlight this again later, but all partners who are named in a proposal must be NIMBLE members by February 6th, so the week before by, again, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and more details on that in a moment. Proposal reviews will go on throughout February and into March. At a two-step process, we have subject matter expert panels that review any given proposal, as well as the TAC or the WAC or other, depending on which process or which project call you're going through, whether it's tech, workforce, or Global Health Fund. We expect, though we can't guarantee yet, that award decisions will be made and advertised or communicated by mid-April. The timeline there is a little bit dependent on some of the other pieces in the process and how those go, as well as availability for a GC meeting, which ultimately will make that final decision. So under the PC 3.1 T and W, so the tech and the workforce side of the project call, we anticipate awarding up to $4 million in the NIMBLE dollars, not the cost share, under the combination of those two, and yet to be determined how that would be broken out between those, depending on which proposals do ultimately end up being submitted, the size of the budget, the scope of work, and the ultimate portfolio that the governing committee decides to approve. So for those who are not familiar with the scale and scope of our typical projects, a large proposal is what has a maximum request in terms of dollars from NIMBLE of $600K. The maximum duration is 12 months, and if you're in that large proposal category, then you require a 1 to 1.25 cost share ratio. That is, for every $1 of NIMBLE ask, the team, not any individual contributor, but the team as a whole must contribute at least 1.25 in cost share. Small proposals are ones that fit under the 300K cap, in which case everything else is the same, except the cost share ratio drops to 1 to 1. The minimum cost share ratio, it's certainly acceptable to have a higher ratio. There are also, in this project call, there is the possibility of workforce planning grants. So within the PC 3.1W, smaller proposals up to a 60K ask, 6 months max, and just that smaller cost share ratio of 1 to 1. So there's also this is the first time we've done a global health fund as part of a project call, and so this is in conjunction with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And so this one is under 3.1G. Some things are similar, some things are different. We'll go over that in a moment, but we anticipate awarding up to $1.5 million total within project call 3.1G. The maximum funding depends on the project size and type. Obviously, it can't be more than 1.5, but it's not as strictly laid out as the 300 and 600 in the T or W versions of PC 3.1. The cost share for Gates Foundation, the Global Health Fund portion of PC 3.1 is 1.1 across the board. We can't say for certain because we haven't seen the full proposals yet, but we anticipate funding up to as many as 3 projects, possibly less. Maximum duration for a PC 3.1G project is 18 months. So eligibility criteria. So first of all, only proposals that came from a concept that was invited to a full proposal will be entertained. The project teams for any given proposal have to have at least 2 organizations that are NIMBLE members as project partners. The asterisk on the second bullet is just to highlight what we mentioned, or what I just mentioned on a previous slide, that you need to be a NIMBLE member, or each partner needs to be a NIMBLE member by no later than 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time by February 6th of next year. And what that means in practical sense is that at least a partially executed NIMBLE membership agreement needs to have been submitted by that time on the 6th. That just means that the new member, if they're someone newly joining, they need to have signed, and we will work on the countersignature between the 6th and the 13th. You also have to have a lead organization. Someone needs to be the lead, and a project manager is identified. We certainly welcome and encourage participation of federal employees in all aspects of the project call process. If there are any questions, we first refer any of the federal employees to the information we have on the PC 3.1 information on the website, but if you have additional questions, just reach out to us. For those who would be actually submitting the proposal, and it is possible for one member of a team to submit on behalf of the rest of the team, that's pretty typical, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the PI. For those, hopefully it's familiar that you went through the concept paper stage and submitted your concept paper online through our proposal submission hub. The website is listed here. And as was noted at the outset, this webinar is going to be posted, is being recorded and will be posted later, so you'll have access to all of these websites. So at the upload, and we encourage people to start their upload well in advance of the deadline so that if you run into questions, you can reach out to us and make sure there aren't any hiccups. You'll fill in your basic information and upload files using the file formats that will be listed there. Upon a successful submission, you will receive a confirmation via email. If you don't receive a confirmation via email, and always check your spam folders, then you definitely need to reach out and make sure that that's been done by that deadline of 5 p.m. Eastern Standard on the 13th. Submissions received after that deadline will not be reviewed and will not be considered further. Please mark all your submissions as NIMBLE confidential. That's in accordance with the NIMBLE bylaws, which hopefully many of you are familiar with by now. The exception is that the title and abstract should not contain confidential information because those will be released into the public domain. And again, we highlight, if you have questions along the way, please reach out to projectcalls@nimble.org. That's staffed by a number of folks on our team, and we'll get back to you as quickly as possible. So let's go through the evaluation criteria. Many of these are similar across PC 3.1 T, W, and G, so we'll just focus on T for the moment. These are all in the RFP, so they're listed in there, but this is just a call out to some of the highlights. In terms of team composition, that bullet captures what we covered earlier, that you have to have a minimum of 2 members. Everyone has to be a NIMBLE member. The budget we'll get to in a second. You clearly need to have laid out your budget. It has to be within the constraints. For T, that means under 600K for large, under 300K for small. You have to meet the cost share requirements. There are some required elements of the proposal that we'll highlight again in a moment, where we also have links to different templates that you can get offline. And then the submission times, which I already highlighted. For the technical criteria, those are listed here. I'm not going to read those out in detail. But if you have questions about those, reach out to us. Many of those are similar between the T, the W, and the G. There are some differences I'll highlight in a moment. And then there are some things that are SME technical panels, or I should say subject matter expert panels review. That's the middle box. Then the TAC also has input, and they focus on the points that are in the far right box. So again, if you have questions, reach out to us and we can cover those specifically, because most of those questions are probably proposal specific. Within the workforce ones, everything on the left is exactly the same as what I just covered. In the middle box, what's a little bit different is that the sustainability is the 4th bullet in strategic fit and impact. Here, if you're proposing a workforce project, you need to make sure that you have included a sustainability plan. That is, once the funding from NIMBLE has finished, what is your plan for maintaining this and making it accessible to members, as well as the broader stakeholders you may have. Otherwise, these are pretty much the same. And so then we'll move on to the one for the Global Health Fund. So in this one, everything is almost exactly the same, except we need to realize that in the technical criteria, this one is a more narrow topic, and it has to be relevant to the global health need. Improvement of the existing methods is still there, but again, within the scope that RFP has laid out around ideally elimination, but at least reduction of the use of animal testing in animals in release testing from a global health fund perspective. All right, so that's quite a bit of information. We realize that may be a bit to digest. We'll pause for a minute or so. Please chat your questions in if you have any. We'll take a minute or two to give you time to type. And if there aren't questions at this point, you can still type them in as we go, and we'll loop back as needed to cover those. If for some reason you have questions later, or your colleagues view this later and have questions, again, projectcalls@nimble.org. Send those in, and we'll be happy to answer those both directly and can also post an FAQ document later after the webinar. So we'll pause and go on mute for a minute and give people a chance to type in questions if they have any. Okay, we have a question that is focused on cost share. The question is basically, do the team members who come from the large industry members typically contribute to the cost share for the proposal. So a few different answers there. First, the short answer is yes, that is a typical pattern. That also raises a related question that often comes up. I mentioned it, but let me dig into it a little bit more here. When thinking about cost share, not every member of the team needs to contribute the same ratio of cost share. So that is, if you're targeting a one-to-one, you shouldn't feel that every member of the team needs to hit that one-to-one. It can instead be that some cover more than others, and that's rather typical, where large industry members contribute much more of the cost share than maybe certainly than small industry members or perhaps academics. But as the team as a whole must hit the target ratio of either 1.25 to 1 or 1 to 1. Okay, so we have another question coming in. Are you planning to share the names of the institutions that are invited to full proposal? So that is not typical practice from our past project calls. And on any given member team, we can certainly share and are already been doing outreach to the PIs for each proposal. If there are other of our members who have expressed interest in getting involved, we've already reached out to the teams, and as we get more information on that, we will keep that going on a rolling basis, but certainly do that as quickly as possible. But it is not expected that we will be openly sharing all of the proposal titles and institutions that have been invited. Right, so we have another question regarding the in-kind or cost share side of things related to what that first question came or focused on. It's essentially asking, is the matching contribution for a project basically for a proposal that's in this project call, in addition to the in-kind or cost share membership contribution for NIMBLE? So they're actually one and the same, in that if your membership tier requires cost share, and most of them do require some level of cost share, the match that you put towards a project call project is counted against that requirement from your membership, assuming, of course, that the project is actually selected for funding. Another one on cost share, and we can get to this in more detail probably in a little bit in the second part of the webinar. So looking for some guidance on, if I interpret the question correctly, it's guidance as to what would be allowable as cost share or what would count as cost share. And we're going to get into that a little bit later in terms of there are some links. And I'll also allow, so Dawn Jory, who's in the room, can also speak to that, I think, more specifically.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that on our project website, we actually have a cost share guidance template that people can use as a reference.
Yeah, so that's on the website, and we have some links at the end that will help direct you to a few of the templates and other information we have. We can loop back on that in a little bit. Okay, we've got quite a few still coming in. So there's a question as a follow-up to one of the ones we just answered, which is around the proposals that have been invited. And so there may be a question around likely funding rates. So that and that's very difficult, so in terms of percentages or what have you. That's essentially impossible to answer right now because the concept papers did not include anything about budget. So we do not know, based on who's been invited, other than guessing, what the scope of, what the size of the team will be, because they're still partnering, and therefore also what the full scope of work is, because work breakdown structures were not required as part of the concept papers and budgets weren't. So that would be a guessing game at this point. So it wouldn't, I don't think it would be fair to make that guess. So one question came in about, can we give more detail about what one envisions as a workforce value proposition or what should be included there? That is actually called out explicitly in the RFP for PC 3.1W. So there's a separate subsection which gives some examples. Those don't have to be, that doesn't have to be an all-inclusive list, but things that would help you with your value proposition are to highlight what your target audience is, who the educational partners would be, the overall, your initial and maybe long-term industry stakeholders, and what is the value to them. So that could be, is it saves time, is it reduction in cost, is it better quality than what they have access to now? Always keep in mind that these are being evaluated within the perspective of the overall NIMBLE community. So the more impact you can have on the broader community, the better. And we are a Manufacturing USA Institute, so the United States side of the biopharmaceutical manufacturing industry is always a key aspect. That doesn't mean those would be that you wouldn't find value in other places, but you need to at least have addressed those sorts of things in order to be able to make your case for why it makes sense as a NIMBLE project. Right, so I did call this out earlier, but let's clarify. This is a question that has come up around level of budget for Global Health Fund projects as opposed to the tech or the workforce. The Global Health Fund projects are clearly, they can't be more than 1.5 million because that's the full amount that we have available potentially to use. But it really has to make sense for the team. Don't target a number, and we'll get into this later where in terms of how to develop your proposal. You really should look at what makes sense as the scope of work and with the partners involved that would take place in the time frame available. Global Health Fund, that's up to 18 months. For tech or workforce, that's a year. And really work backwards, including thinking about your cost share. All of those need to be factored in. Rather than, I really need to emphasize for teams, do not target, we need to hit a certain number, and how do we get there? You're doing it backwards if you go about it that way. And we'll reinforce that with some examples of how to help you develop that as we go through the webinar. So there are still some questions coming in, and we do need to try and keep the time. There are other things going that we need to cover. Any of the ones we didn't cover as questions, we will type these up and post them so you have them available afterwards. There's one really quick one that I can address right now because we're not going to touch on it later in the webinar, which is around an IP agreement. So the question is, does the team need to reach an IP agreement before the proposal is submitted? The answer to that is no. Right? It's great that if you're already thinking ahead on that with the team, in fact, the earlier you get started on that, the better, but that is not part of the submission. Only after a team is selected or a proposal is selected for funding are you required to move on that. But we do have templates available, and if you want to get started ahead of time, that is an excellent discussion to have so that your partners know what they're agreeing to before they get going. All right, so with that, we're going to conclude this portion of the webinar, and I'm going to turn this over to Peggy Thomas, who's going to take you through the next part of the slides and then the Q&A to follow with that. Again, feel free to type in questions as we go. If we run out of time, we won't be able to answer all of them in this webinar, but we will make sure we have typed up, posted answers to at least, if the questions are the same questions, again, we'll just consolidate those and we'll make sure we get that up on the website for you for follow-up. And you can always reach out to us afterwards through the projectcalls@nimble.org email address.
Hi, everyone. I'm Peggy Thomas. As Chris mentioned, I'm the Senior Program Manager for NIMBLE, and I would like to talk today a little bit about the elements of a full proposal. First of all, congratulations on being invited to submit a full proposal, and thank you for calling in today. I do want to point out that this project call is going to be a little different from previous NIMBLE project calls. As NIMBLE has grown, the project call process has become more competitive, and as we get more proposals, we need to be more selective during the review process. So going forward, it will be increasingly important to follow the instructions outlined in the RFP and provide all of the proposal components as required in Section 3.3 of each of the RFPs. So we have the 3.1T, which is technology, 3.1W, which is workforce, and the 3.1G, which is the Global Health Fund. Today we're going to go piece by piece to reiterate what is required in your proposal documentation. For starters, I want to point out that there is a proposal checklist on the website, and this is a great tool to use when you're compiling all of your documentation that's required for a compliant proposal submission. Right above the checklist on our website are links to the RFPs, and I cannot stress enough that you read this document if you want to submit a compliant proposal. So on the slide now we have the elements of the full proposal, but before I start going through them, I do want to talk a little bit about the submission process. So just like when you're collaborating on a project, you have the lead organization that's directing the work and compiling the reports, and during proposal submission, it's kind of the same situation. The lead proposer should be compiling all of the required documents and organizing the proposal narrative. The lead needs to collect a budget table, budget justification, and a letter of intent or project partner information form from each project partner. So everybody has to have their own budget and include them in the proposal package. You're probably going to hear me repeat a few things several times throughout this webinar, and Chris has already repeated them, and I'm sorry if you get tired of hearing us say it, but they are good takeaways from this webinar. You need to read the RFP from cover to cover. The RFP templates and guides are all on our website, and if you have any questions throughout the process, just email them to projectcalls@nimble.org. And that's any questions regarding the process. So now we'll go ahead and start going through the elements that are on the slide. The first one is the Project Partner Information Form, which is also known as the PPIF. Each and every industry partner needs to complete a Project Partner Information Form and submit it to the lead. The PPIF includes questions about your financial system, audits, and a bunch of other federal and administrative information, so you need to involve your financial staff when completing it. In fact, you should probably just let them complete it. It must be signed by an authorized organizational representative, meaning someone who is approved to sign legal documents on behalf of the organization. There are some academic members who participate in the FDP clearinghouse, and if you fall into this category, you can elect to submit a letter of intent instead of the PPIF. Both templates are on our website. Academic PIs who are unsure if your institution participates in the FDP clearinghouse should contact their Office of Sponsored Programs. If you are an academic institution who does not participate in the clearinghouse, then you must submit a project partner information form. Again, we must get one or the other from every partner organization. Next on the list, number 2, is the abstract. The abstract should include the names and contact information of the lead organization, each partner organization, the PI, and all co-PIs. The abstract is a brief description of the proposal. It is limited to 200 words, but that contact information that I just mentioned is not included in that word count. The abstract will be released to the public if an award is made. Therefore, teams are expected to ensure that it does not contain any confidential or proprietary information. The abstract should be included in the PDF of your proposal document, so there's going to be one main PDF file that you upload to the Submission Hub. The abstract should be in that PDF, but it doesn't count towards the page limit for your proposal narrative. And also in the Submission Hub, there will be a text field where you should copy and paste your abstract. So you're going to actually have to upload the abstract twice. The executive summary, moving on, is just that, a summary of the proposed work. It should explain how the proposal is consistent with the project call, topic area, and NIMBLE goals. It should describe the MRL level, if applicable, and the anticipated impact of the project. The executive summary is limited to 1 page, but again, it does not count towards the page limit of the proposal narrative, and it should be included in the PDF of your proposal. So I'm not going to go into detail on the sections of the proposal narrative. They're all on your screen. And if you weren't all on mute, I would get you to say it with me. The details are in the RFP, so make sure you read it. I would like to point out that the Appendix D, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, it should align with your proposal narrative, specifically the project description. And on this slide, I would also like to point out that the description of team is intended to be a brief description of the contributions to this project. It's not where you give us a history of your accomplishments throughout your career. The next slide will talk about a bio-sketch, and that's where you provide your CV-type details. The description of team in your proposal narrative should only be about the roles and responsibilities of the key personnel as they pertain to this project. So this slide is about required appendices, and required means you have to include them as proposal documents. I'm not going to go through each one of these. The bio-sketch is pretty self-explanatory. We do recommend the NSF format, but any CV will be acceptable as long as it's 2 pages or less. And the quad chart is a summary, and the template for the quad chart is also on our website. We do recommend that you complete the quad chart last because one of the quadrants asks for budget information, and that is a consolidated budget, so you need to get all of the budgets from your partners and total them and then put that total figure on the quad chart. And it should be the total NIMBLE funding you're requesting and the total cost share that you're contributing. The Appendix C, we're going to have another section about that because it's a big part of the proposal. And then Appendix D is going to be different with this project call, and there's going to be a few slides about that going forward. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide for now. So these are additional proposal appendices. Again, they are mostly self-explanatory, but I would like to mention that the last one on the list, Appendix H, is a Tier 3 industry member partner exemption request. So this only applies to the technology proposals, and it just means that if you don't include a Tier 3 industry member in your, as one of your project partners, then you need to complete this Appendix H and add that to your proposal. And the template for that is also on our website. Oh, and Appendix G, I should probably mention. Letters of commitment are not required, but if, for example, you have someone with expertise who just wants to consult but doesn't want to be a party to the project award agreement, they can submit a letter of commitment. The letter should be on company letterhead, but then that organization wouldn't have to sign the agreement when you're ready to execute it. And they wouldn't be required to submit a PPIF. You can also include cost share commitments from state agencies in this appendix if that applies. So everything that we've talked about so far should be included in a single PDF file that you upload to the NIMBLE Submission Hub except for these 4 items on the slide in front of you. The quad chart should be a PowerPoint slide that gets uploaded separately. The project plan will be a Word doc, and again, we'll talk about that in a few slides forward. The budget is an Excel file, and the budget justification is a Word doc. And for all of those listed, there is a template on our website. So the budget table, like I said, we're introducing a new budget table and budget justification with Project Call 3.1. If you've submitted to any of our previous project calls, we had a budget workbook that had several tabs and was a bit onerous, and we have done away with that, yay. And we hope that this new table and separate justification will be easier for you to prepare. Each organization on the team must submit their own budget and budget justification, but that goes to the lead, and when the lead goes into the submission hub and uploads documents, they'll upload it for you. So just make sure the lead needs to make sure they have a budget from every partner. And the cleaner your budgets are at proposal stage, the faster we'll be able to approve them and get your agreement package prepared for signature on the back end. So budget information, all costs must follow the federal guidelines known as 2 CFR 200 or uniform guidance, and that is because NIMBLE is funded by NIST, who is a federal agency, and we are part of the University of Delaware, so we have to follow the academic guidelines, which is uniform guidance. If you're a large industry member, we have been having separate conversations to try and reduce the burden of all of these academic rules and regulations, and hopefully we'll have more information for you on that in the near future. So then just going down the rest of this slide, construction costs are not allowed. There are a few states that have cost share funding available. So if your organization is based in Delaware, Massachusetts, or North Carolina, there's information in the RFP about how you can get cost share funding from those states. And there are a couple of NIMBLE meetings that you'll be required to attend. The NIMBLE national meeting, every project team is required to present at the national meeting, and every project team, once your agreement is fully executed, will have a project kickoff meeting. So it's recommended that you budget travel for both of those meetings. And if you have any questions, you know who to contact, projectcalls@nimble.org. So this slide is just a screenshot of our new and improved budget table, and what you see on this slide is what you get. This is the entire budget table. So hopefully, like I said, if you've submitted before, you'll find this one a little less burdensome. It separates costs that incur indirect costs and those that don't, and it does have some items listed that are included in the other categories. But the budget justification should be more helpful in making that determination. And just note that these items on the list, it's not an all-inclusive list. So if you have any questions, you can contact us at projectcalls@nimble.org. I'm even getting tired of saying it. So when you're preparing your budget, you should use your work breakdown structure. So you definitely want to do your project plan first, and then use that to create your budget. And when we review your documents, we should be able to compare the two and see a correlation. So for example, if you need a piece of equipment for segment 1, we should see your equipment budgeted in segment 1. And then in segment 2, if you need samples to run on your new equipment, then we should see a large supply budget in segment 2, and so on. We recommend that you apply the cost share ratio to each segment in your budget, but we recognize that that isn't always possible, and sometimes it doesn't even apply. Like if you're getting cost share from one of the large industry members, then your cost share requirement might be less. So as you can see, there's a place to put in your indirect cost rate, and then the table will calculate your indirect costs for you. And we do have, so in the old workbook, we had a section where you could put your justification on each tab for each category, and now we have a separate justification, which is on the next slide. And this will be a Word document that I couldn't fit on one slide, so I just have little snippets here. But it should describe all of the costs that you have in your budget table. So as you can see from this example, we do provide guidance in the template to hopefully make it easier for you to complete. And as you can see in the instructions that are in red font, bold, on this snippet, there are sections that probably won't apply to your budget, and you can just highlight them and hit delete on this budget justification. So you only need to keep the sections that actually apply to your budget. So for example, if you don't have any vendors in your budget, then you can go to your budget justification and just completely delete that section. The supplies and equipment sections on the justification template have a table in there, so you can itemize your intended purchases. And when I say itemize, you don't have to be so specific that you list like 50 pipettes at $100 each for a total of $5,000 and 100 widgets at $10 each for $1,000. But you don't want to be so vague that you just say lab supplies $10,000. You can have one line that says pipettes, widgets, culture cell media, and gloves, $10,000. So I think that's it for the budget justification. There is a section for indirect costs, and if you have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, then you should use it. If you don't, and you've never had one, you can use 10% for your indirect cost, which is the federal de minimis, or you can just not include indirect costs and try to direct charge everything. That is allowable. So in the coming slides, we're going to talk a little bit more, and Chris kind of touched on this as well, about not starting with a total budget number in mind and trying to get to that number. You should base your budget solely on your work breakdown structure. And Melissa will talk about that a little bit more too when she goes over the project plan. And I think that wraps up my portion of this presentation. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask right now, you can go ahead and chat them in. And we'll just pause for a minute for questions. Okay, so we do have a few questions that came in. The first one is, do volunteer participating companies have to be NIMBLE members? And the answer is the short answer is yes. The only way someone can participate on a project and not be a NIMBLE member is if they're just, you're paying them to do a service for you. So they would be a contractor or a vendor. And they wouldn't have any right to the IP. They wouldn't be doing substantive programmatic work. They would just be doing something that their business does every day. The next question, for the budget, are you looking for individual budgets from all partners as well as an overall consolidated budget? And the short answer is no. We do want individual budgets from every project partner. Even if you are only committing cost share, you still have to provide a budget and a budget justification. But the only place that we ask for the consolidated amount is that one quadrant on the quad chart. So we don't need a full, like, consolidated budget, just the total amount. And what are the segments for is that cost period. And that's a tough question. So segments are part of your project plan. And Melissa will talk about that in the next section of the webinar. But your budget does need to align with your project plan. So you want to have segments in your budget that match up to the segments in your work breakdown structure that Melissa is going to talk about. And I don't see any more questions coming in, so I think we're going to wrap up this section of the webinar, and I'm going to hand the mic over to Melissa Scott, who is going to discuss the project plan and the elements of the project plan.
Okay, thanks, Peggy. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Melissa Scott. I'm a scientific project manager with NIMBLE. In the next few slides, I'm going to go over in detail the requirements that you'll have for your project plan document or Appendix C. So, and I hope by the end of this, you'll get a better understanding of what the appendix is, what this document's all about, what it's going to be used for, and what content is needed to create a good project plan for your proposal. And you might find after listening to this presentation that you'll want to start preparing your project plan first before you start diving into your narrative and some of the other documents that you'll need for your proposal. So the project plan includes the project's WBS, or work breakdown structure, the RAM, or responsibility assignment matrix, and the Gantt chart. I'll go through each section individually. I wanted to point out that in this slide, I'm going to show multiple ways where the project plan is going to be used throughout the life cycle of your project. One of the ways during your proposal phase, it's a one-stop document that's going to aid you in project planning and budgeting. It's going to be a convenient tool for you to use as you're resourcing and budgeting for the project. And as you're already aware, this document is going to be reviewed and evaluated by the review panel once you submit your proposal. It's going to be reviewed for technical merit, including scientific approach, realistic deliverables, and timelines. The review panel is also going to be evaluating your criteria for success that's included in your WBS, and also the technical expertise for the proposed work that's going to appear in this document. So as you can see, a well-developed project plan is to your advantage during the proposal phase. It's going to overshadow a good narrative if reviewers can't tell who is doing what and when, and the level of expertise to complete the task. So, and also developing a project plan should be a team effort. So everyone should be contributing to this document and putting forth their effort. If your project is funded, down the line, it'll be used as a tracking document throughout the project lifecycle. It provides the structure for monthly reports, and it'll appear on a high level in your project portal page. And it's also going to be referenced in communications to stakeholders and ultimately in this quarterly reports as well. So keep in mind that this is the work that the team is committing to to perform is selected for funding. It's intended to be a standalone document, and it's going to be eventually, if your project is selected, it'll be Exhibit B of your project award agreement. So it's pretty important to get this document right and put it together with your team. So on the next slide, we're going to break down the project plan into its basic elements. If you look at the table below, you'll see the project plan is divided into the WBS, or work breakdown structure, the RAM, and the Gantt. So looking at the WBS portion, the first level is level 1, which is the project title. So it's pretty self-explanatory. You're going to put your project title here. And then underneath, you're going to list your project team organizations, so the lead and all the partners involved. And then level 2, these are the segments. So Peggy referred to this earlier with one of the questions. Each segment is considered a project deliverable. So these are the results, the products or capabilities that will be generated from the project. So you can call them the segments or the project deliverables. Probably in the beginning, as you're developing your WBS, you're going to think of them as your project deliverables. And this is what is delivered or considered to be a project output for the stakeholders. And at the end of the project, it should be a tangible or realistic thing that's produced. In addition, the project budget for each partner is going to be developed to level 2. So just something to keep in mind as you're developing your WBS. And then at level 3, this is where the deliverables or the segments are deconstructed into tasks, subtasks, milestones, and go-no-go decision points. The tasks will have a defined start and end date, and they can have one or multiple partners assigned to each task. And this is also the level where milestones and go-no-go decision points are put into place in the schedule. And I'll get to the schedule in the next few slides. And so breaking down level 3 into a little bit greater detail. So talking about the task. A task is a single unit of work. It has a defined start and end date. The duration could be as short as 1 month or span the entire length of the project. The task should be specific and definitive enough to stand alone for the project tracking purposes. In the template, we show a few examples of tasks for both workforce and technical projects. Technical, in this case, would also include a Gates Foundation proposal as well. Also, at this stage, it's a good place to start thinking about dependencies and what needs to happen in order for one partner to start working. It's also a good time to start thinking about tasks or work that needs to be done prior to a task, such as do I need to get permits or do I need to get a signed MTA in place before getting started? Tasks should be broken down into what's described as right-sized chunks. Remember to get your team's input also throughout this process. It's going to be important for not only digging into the details of what needs to get done, it also helps with defining project handoff points as well. Also, at this level, you're going to develop your milestones, and you can begin to identify them. A project milestone is a specific point during a project where the work can be evaluated or recognized by stakeholders. It should be specific and quantifiable. There's a few examples that are listed in our WBS template for you to consider. As you can see, the project can be tracked at a high level with this workforce project milestone. So if you're coming in as a stakeholder and you're looking to track the project, you can see here for this example, completed curriculum available to all participating organizations for review. That's a tangible thing that can be looked at and evaluated throughout the course of the project. So just as you're thinking of, kind of what is a milestone versus what is a task, these are high-level ways to track the progress throughout the project. So, and also with your milestones, think SMART with specific, measurable, attainable, and relevant and time-based as you're developing the wording for these milestones. And then talking about go, no-go decision points. So each project is required to have at least one go, no-go decision point. These are important for the team to kind of get together and decide on the course of the project. It needs to occur somewhere about a third to halfway through the project. Try to avoid putting your go, no-go decision points towards the end of the project. At that point, it's really hard to change the course of a project, or it's really hard to save the evaluation all the way to the end. So, and also place your go, no-goes where it makes sense within the course of the project. This is also a good point to start thinking about and talking with your team partners about project risk and also risk mitigation strategies. And you might consider creating a risk log, and definitely involve your partners in this process of developing the go, no-go decision points, because they are really important, and it's good to have everyone's input and again, start that discussion around risk. So the next slide goes over the RAM, which is the other 1/3 of the project plan. This is the responsibility assignment matrix, and this is where you'll call out who will be working on each task, and you'll reference the organization. I don't know if you remember the beginning of the slide deck where we've called out which organizations were going to be involved in the project. Each one is given kind of a number, and this number will appear, as you can see in the RAM section, as organizations 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on the number of partners that you have. And each partner will be assigned a role as either a lead, participant, or consultant. The lead is accountable and responsible for the segment of the work to be done. You'll need at least a lead for each task in the RAM. And then depending on what makes sense, your other participants in the projects are either going to be listed as a participant or a consultant. Participant being substantively contributing to the segment, and then the consultant would just be consulted about the work to be done, but not actually in the lab or in the space carrying out the work. They might just be calling into the meetings and providing expertise through advice. So the next slide goes over the Gantt. So this is your project schedule. It's not a true Gantt chart in that it doesn't show dependencies, but at least it kind of gives an idea of duration of your tasks and also your points where the milestones of go, no-go decision points will be held. It's tracked to the month, so that's the level of detail that we're looking for. So each task is going to need the Gantt chart, the number of months to be filled out. And like I said, tasks can either last, one month, or it can last the entire duration of the project. It kind of depends on how the project is scheduled. And even though this Gantt chart doesn't show it, it's a good idea to think about dependencies and think about project handoffs and how that's going to go. So just kind of wrapping it all up, looking at the example of process flow for putting together your project plan, you'll start with identifying your major deliverables or your major segments of the project. What do you want to accomplish, and what are the things that you want the tangible outcomes that you want to come out of this project with? And at this point, you'll be identifying partners, and there should be some kind of overlap as you're working on your project plan. You'll be deciding who's doing what and who has the technical expertise and the resources available for each partner to make sure that all the deliverables in the segments are covered for the project. And here's where you can start developing your WBS, and again, in constant contact with your partners and making sure that they're okay with everything that's being laid out and the schedule. You'll begin to deconstruct your deliverables into tasks and get into a little bit more granular detail. You may need some subtasks in there as well. And then which tasks are assigned to which partner, and where the tasks need to be placed in the schedule based on resources and what makes sense for the project. And then next, you can begin to work on your budget, and it's best to start working on the budget once you have everything kind of laid out, all the work that needs to be done, all the resources that you have, and then the schedule that you have laid out, so that you're not going back and forth and having to update your budget while revamping your WBS. You kind of keep the direction of the flow going forward. And then craft narrative. So I think hopefully you can see the idea is to craft your narrative once you've identified your major deliverables, gone into the details and gone into the nuts and bolts of the project, and gotten everyone involved and gotten the budget squared away. And then it's probably easiest here where you can craft your narrative and then do it once and then not have to go back and edit things as you're changing. So I think at this time we'll take a break for any questions. So we got a question around the responsibility assignment matrix, and I can see why. It's something that we kind of, I think it was part of the 2.2, and it might have been thrown in at the 2.1 phase, but if for some of you, this might be the first time that you have to fill out a RAM for the project plan. So just breaking it down into the elements of that column there, the organizations are 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that refers back to the kind of the top of the document where you list out, your organization, starting with the lead organization or the lead PI, and that would be, let's say, organization 1, and then you might have a partner 2, a partner 3, and a partner 4. So going across now for each task, you'll list out, let's say the PI is leading off the first task. So that's listed as organization 1 is the L under task 1.1. And then organization 2 might just be calling in and have some expertise on that project, and they're being consulted, but not actually doing any hands-on work. And there might be some work that partner number 3 is doing to contribute to 1.1, and they're actually doing some hands-on work as a participant in that task. So I hope that answers your question a little bit more clearly. I know this is sometimes, for some of you, this might be your first time going through and filling out a RAM chart. Feel free to follow up with us with any other questions. Okay, so some additional questions. Where would purchasing equipment fit in level 2? The answer is yes. So yes, you're budgeting to level 2 to your high level, your deliverables or what we're calling the segments. Are these slides going to be available? Yes. I believe the recordings are going to be on our website and available for you to listen through at a later time. Individual budgets, but just one project plan, correct? Yes, that's correct. So, right, so each partner is going to have their own individual budget, but there's going to be one project plan, and that's that one, this one project plan document that's the template on our website. So the team will be, contributing to the project plan as a team effort, but the budgets are going to be each individual partner's responsibility to submit.
A couple of the questions we've got coming in, folks, are ones that are very specific to a given project team. It's really not productive for everyone else on the line to do that this way, but please just follow up with us with those questions through the projectcalls@nimble.org email address, because then we can reference it back to the information we have from you already and make that a more efficient use of your time and also make it more specific for you. So we're going to wait for a minute and take a couple more being typed in. Just give us a moment. All right, we have a question that it's not uncommon, is to try and get clarity on when you list, for example, that your budget in terms of the Nimble ask is $300,000. Is that direct and indirect costs? For those of you who come from an academic background, that's a normal way to think. For those from an industrial point of view, they're all lumped in together anyway. The short answer is it's direct and indirect. It's not direct to 300K and then you can add the indirect on top of that. That's 300K. You might call it all in. All right, and folks, and we're going to end up having more questions than we can answer, so what I'm doing now is sort of consolidating a few questions that are in a similar vein to sort of try and hit a few of them at once. So for those who came on a little later, one of the questions that was answered earlier was around people trying to get a sense of not only, say, how many proposals were invited and what the hit rate is going to be, percentage-wise, what have you. First of all, we don't share how many proposals were invited at this point, in part because invitation does not mean necessarily submission. Teams are still trying to form. They may not get the necessary partners. If you go through the process that Melissa laid out, and again, we'll stress, you need to go through that process. As you get into that, you may find that someone who had intended to be a partner on a team decides that that's not what they're really interested in from an industry perspective, as an example, and may decide that that team shrinks, therefore the budget changes. Therefore, the team may even choose not to submit this round and try and come back in the next project call. Very difficult for us to make those calls. We've seen that happen in most of the prior project calls. So I'm not going to venture a guess there. As far as percentages, that also adds into the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty there. And if one's asking, well, what was the historical rate? That's basically almost irrelevant in this case. This is only, this is 3.1, right? And some of the prior project calls ran under a very different mantra than what this one's running. And as was stressed by Peggy, this has, shall we say, a more competitive nature than some of the prior ones because people are better now poised to put in the more competitive proposals. So and we have no idea what their budgets are going to be at this point, so we don't really have a way to make that call, and it would not be wise to venture a guess at this point. And just to reiterate that we're going to consolidate the questions that were typed in and put down answers to them in essentially an FAQ document that will be posted. So that we stated that earlier, and we'll just reiterate that now. We'll pause for a moment before we do a wrap-up, just in case there are any last questions that come out of maybe a different nature before we wrap up and give everyone back their time for the rest of the day. All right, folks. So everything else we're seeing coming in really falls in the category of things that either we have answered or that it's better to do as a one-on-one with a particular organization. So we'll just come up with one more slide, and then we have some wrap-up for you. And again, these will be posted with the voiceover recorded, so you can listen to them as that, or you can forward them along to colleagues who may only be interested in a portion of it. You've got the website that we've got listed on the left. You can email at the projectcalls@nimble.org address. And then, of course, at least for those who are already members, you can access the community portal through your login. And if you do have one thing I didn't stress earlier, but it has come up occasionally, and it's in a theme that sometimes pops up in questions, is if you do have partners who are not yet Nimble members, that doesn't mean you shouldn't include them in your discussions now, but they do need to realize that they've got to be members by the time that you submit, basically by the 6th, actually, of February. So get them moving on whatever conversations they need to have with us around membership, and that same email address is the right one to send to, because that can take some prior approvals. That was mentioned by Peggy, it was mentioned elsewhere, and we do realize the holidays are coming up, and so get people moving as quickly as possible. January will move by quite quickly. So with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Dan to wrap us up.
All right, thank you for attending today's webinar. As a reminder, this presentation has been recorded and will be posted on the Nimble Project Call 3.1 webpage by the end of the week. The Project Call 3.1 webpage also includes links to the guides and templates referenced today. If you have any questions about today's content, please email projectcalls@nimble.org. Have a great day.